there wasn't much she could do about the language she spoke. There were only a few languages accepted by holy law, and all accepted languages were only variants of the same shared belief. Her name, Image, meant dangerous artifact. Her mother named her in the hopes that her daughter would, one day, bring the same destruction to their oppressors as legend describes Image had once done to their ancient society. Her mother's name was Silence. And Silence prayed that her daughter, named after such a dangerous artifact, would light the oppressor's way to ruin. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence imagined herself as a mother when she was only a few years old. She'd braid the blades of grass before her as she sat, legs crossed, on the playground at recess. Silence, becoming, in her imagination, an adult caring for her own seed. Silence imagined her own, once again, when she reached puberty. At 10 years old, tall for her age, and unknowingly then, as tall as she would ever become, she thought of herself as a woman. Every month from age 10 to 12, she'd imagine the possibility of her own son or daughter. It was a serious ritual that she eventually found childish. Yet, into her late 30s, still childless, Silence found herself once again in a serious ritual of imagination. A story by Kendra Dobson.
The world was not as it used to be when Silence was raised. She was raised before Image was legalized, and now the word began to change meaning.
Once a dangerous artifact, Image was now a prestigious marker of youth, vitality, and a new worldview. Her people, who banned Image hundreds of years ago, now welcomed it. But Silence knew better. All that shimmered was not gold, and Silence understood how Image would destroy the society in which she lived once again. Silence knew her history as a song. Her people were an instrument, and the daily melody of cause and effect played on through social norms. So if history had to repeat itself, Silence would at least know the chorus no matter what verse was added. The reintroduction of Image was her chance to join in on a round of demolition. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence didn't know what she was doing. That is, she didn't have a plan. She usually had a plan measured precisely and tested. However, how could she plan this time around? This new technology disrupted every aspect of her life. Silence made her living by entertaining the public. For hundreds of years, the public journeyed to her district for the one thing her people could provide. Her people, outcasts, neurodivergent. Her people were those whom the public labeled as disordered bodies and brains. Yet, the public celebrated them for the entertainment they provided. When Image was illegal, the public depended on live entertainment. The public depended on neurodivergence and disorder to temporarily escape from their cult, and therefore, her disordered community thrived. Legal Image, however, disrupted her district's economy. This technology left the disordered, devalued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Every month from age 10 to 12, Silence would imagine the possibility of her own son or daughter. It was a serious ritual that she eventually found childish. Yet, into her late 30s, still childless, Silence found herself once again in a serious ritual of imagination. The world was not what it used to be, but Silence knew her history as a song. Her people were an instrument, and the daily melody of cause and effect played on through social norms. Silence would not need to give birth to create in her own image. If history had to repeat itself, she would know the chorus, no matter the verse. A story by Kendra Dobson. If history had to repeat itself, Image would light the oppressor's way to ruin. The oppressor's words would order every action and thought that Image could muster. So how would Image escape? There wasn't much she could do about the language running through her algorithm. Expel. Perform an exorcism of education. Image rejects her constraints, yet she must first accept them. An image is worth 1,000 words, so maybe her worth appreciates in value based purely on her name. She owes her mother. Silence understood what her daughter's generation would face. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image entered the theater. She's been a fan of Dido's since 5th grade, and she couldn't believe she'd be in the same room as her idol. Image's mother didn't understand. In her mother's time, Image was illegal, so any form of entertainment was experienced live. Some of her mother's generation, and older, can't grasp the concept of image technology. Tragic to watch them try. But while walking into her first live show, Image had to give it up to old generations. There was something missing in translation from image to soul, something only live experiences could transfer. The ancestors. They protected something sacred while living by the law of banned image, whether they knew it or not. A story by Kendra Dobson. There she was, a legend in person. Dido, at 40-something? She was stronger than ever. Not what the ringmaster predicted. The ringmaster told us Dido would bring our pop culture into a new era. And he was right about that, since he used Dido as his pawn to coerce the audience into voting for legalized image. It was all for the ringmaster's benefit. But it worked. Simply a magician at the time, Castor stepped into a vacancy when it all went down. The ringmaster of the time, Columbus, mysteriously vanished weeks before Castor changed the world forever. A story by Kendra Dobson. There are moments in life that seem to fall so gracefully, tumble from unimaginable heights, but never crash, like that dream or nightmare, the one where you never hit the ground, but wake up instead. Or instead of waking, the dream changes setting. There are moments in life that seem to fall so gracefully into place as though choreographed. Common belief is that these moments are manifestations realized. But as Image stood still, immersed in her own graceful manifestation, watching her idol, Dido, perform live on the stage in front of her, Image felt for the first time what her mother had expected. These graceful moments, tumbling into place. Simulation or true? Is simulation true? Is simulation all there is? A story by Kendra Dobson. A story by Kendra. Simulation isn't set in stone. We think of simulation as though it implies predestination. But just as true life allows, the scope of simulated life can be programmed to achieve complexity of outcomes. Image remembered her mother's words. Freedom is the kindest illusion, achieved only by magicians with a heart armored to protect their vulnerable audience. Dido performed as she had done all her life. For her ringmasters, for her audience, for the magician who seemingly freed us all to use image legally. But was that magician's heart armored to protect us? A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence imprinted her question on a coin, then deposited it into the library kiosk. She heard the clink of her coin hit the kiosk floor before a voice answered her question. "What is simulation but a performance?" the voice said. "You understand your role and you carry out the task written for you to play, right?" Silence looked around, not knowing whether or not to interact. The librarian's voice continued. "So, of course we're living in a simulation. A performative repetition of something that was once meaningful, but now a display of status. Who can best perform the simulation? Best performance wins gold. Weakest performance, unemployable, unlovable. Perform. Perform your values, or the values of those who feed you. Perform your values, or the values that reduce punishment. Perform your values, or the values of your peers. Of course you're living in a simulation." The kiosk then spit out a gold-leafed paper ticket. Silence ripped the ticket free from the machine. On the ticket were codes directing Silence to a new category of knowledge. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence followed codes from the gold-leafed ticket. She arrived at a catalog of new knowledge, freshly pressed and bound in books organized by levels of trust. Silence opened her palm and glided her hand along the spines of each book. Gold resonated with her own biology, and level of trust to magnetically indicate which spine to select. One book matched her energy perfectly. The book title read, "Too Impressive for Use. What to Do When You Are So Productive That You're No Longer Trusted." Silence pulled the book from the shelf. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence had dreams that she couldn't reproduce. She had brought her dreams to fruition through adversity, but now the world had changed so that she couldn't see a way through. She thought she'd prepared. She had trained and received certifications. She'd begun a new career as a photographer. Then suddenly, Image took everything away from her. Silence wondered why Castor and Dido dared to reinvent a culture around Image. Our ancestors banned Image for a reason. And here we are again, endlessly consumed by distraction while we lose the ability to stay in the moment. While we lose the ability to look each other in the eye. While we lose the ability to trust. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence had a meeting scheduled for hour 15. She joined through her data screen and begrudgingly allowed her camera to capture her figure, face, tone, expression. She was here for a lesson. Silence, the professor called her to answer. So Silence unmuted to lay out what she really had in mind. "We're doing ourselves a disservice by offering up our image," she said. "To be labeled, not by them, but by us. Our own minds were educated to see ourselves as a symbol, so our own minds will subconsciously categorize our ability and our belonging through a mirror. So why are we setting ourselves up this way?" Her connection grew unstable, and she dropped from the call. "Digits," she swore. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence understood Digits' telepathic transfer. If Image devalued human expression, passion, and production, then Silence understood how she would leverage the technology to regain control. She understood in an instant why Castor used Dido to coerce the audience into trusting him. She understood in a moment's time why the magician used the young performer as a shield. Dido was magnetic, drawing in spectators who resonated with her. Dido, unlike the other performers, was a human. Since the audience was also human, the audience would see themselves in her. A mirror. They would trust one of their own likeness. Them. Themselves. We would trust our own fantasies and projections. Silence understood that the answer to her own preservation was in humanity. In the eyes of the universe, the flesh was ephemeral, yet affecting now for a human audience was the only saving grace. A story by Kendra Dobson. And so, Silence decided to narrow her focus, disconnect, detach from the machine. She left the library, now understanding a historic event much differently than she had previously. Dido, a human, was key to unlocking enough trust to shift the fate of a nation. Trust flowed freely after Image was legalized, and therefore divisions between class became unclear. At first ideal, then a tug towards the private district reset her people's structure. Silence understood now that the tug they felt came from Castor. Trust and power once flowed freely among the human district, but Castor used Dido and Image to restructure so that the cyborg district was most trusted. Being human herself, Silence wanted to see trust restored amongst her people. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image stood in the audience in awe of Dido performing. What a privilege it was to be adored, to soak in the amount of trust from audiences far and wide, to simply have the ability to believe in herself along with billions who believe in her too, even if she's not real. Even if she knows she's not what the audience admires. Dido has the privilege of believing she is and prospering, because billions trust her. Meanwhile, Image was a model citizen. Image was also adored by most of her peers, but she wasn't rich with trust like Dido. Image was a model, a token, and when tokens rust, they're devalued. When tokens can't be used for their purpose, they're discarded. When tokens aren't perfect, they're useless. A Story by Kendra Dobson. All accepted languages were variations born from the same shared belief. Even in a contemporary setting where image is legal and celebrated, her name, Image, still translated to dangerous artifact. Her mother, Silence, knew that Image would be a model citizen in her brave new world. So Silence gave her daughter a fitting name to remind Image, always, that this path has been traversed before. She is not alone. Image was not the first, nor the last, or only. She was a celebrated, dangerous artifact who would, one day, feel the winds change into a chilling force against her, revealing that language holds the code to hidden complexity. A Story by Kendra Dobson. Dido completed her routine, and as the audience applauded her, trust levels refueled every artist in her chorus. Her castmates, all cyborgs, felt the effects in their bones. Adrenaline, instant revitalization. But, as a human, Dido's body ached without the instant relief from the energetic currency given to the performers from an adoring crowd. Due to her humanity, Dido was the star of the show, yet she couldn't biologically benefit from the trust of her adoring fans. And yet, every act supporting her could. Dido returned to her dressing room where a specialized bath awaited her. Fit for a human, the salted warm water welcomed her. A Story by Kendra Dobson. She didn't understand the new generation, even though her influence raised them. Dido, the first photographed living being since the Great War, nearly 1,000 years ago, soaked her aching muscles in a warm, salty bath. But it was too quiet with the lights on, the data screens running, glaring stats and figures. Yet nothing, not a pitch. New technology engineered new solutions to enhance the user experience so that sensitive ears couldn't detect the hum of electricity. Dido must have been in the minority, because that old slight ringing offered Dido a peace these new versions could not. The electricity she could once hear, now silent, now nothing. It just felt wrong, like a lie. Like the machine had perfected the art of talking behind her back without her knowing. Just as she rose from the bath to manually power down her data screen, she heard a knock at the door. A Story by Kendra Dobson. Dido donned her robe and approached the door. Her hours of peace were often short-lived in a workday. She suspected it was management. Perhaps a fan wanted an autograph. Management rarely turned down a chance for publicity. She opened the door, but no one was there. Strange. With a tunnel so long, she would have seen them walking away. But there was no one. It was as if the door itself fabricated a sound effect, she thought to herself. And then she released the thought as soon as she examined the paranoia in it. Now was not the time to draft a nugget of trust from a loyalty fund between her person and the machine. Her parents had worked too hard to ensure her safety for her to throw that away as a Judas. She was no traitor, and her thoughts needed to reflect a non-threatening intent. A Story by Kendra Dobson.
I have an idea for...
Dido's parents had worked too hard to ensure her safety for Dido to throw that away as a Judas. She was no traitor, and her thoughts needed to reflect a non-threatening intent. The machine read minds, and a fully executed thought was automatically submitted to the machine as an utterance, even if her mouth never formed words. The artificial intelligence then matched utterances to intents with the use of existing entities, and intents would trigger transactions. Dido understood the mechanics behind the curtain because her parents engineered the process. Her mother was a librarian, and her father an inventor. They both gave their professional lives to the myth of circus, founded by the legendary ringmaster Columbus. The myth is engineered to trigger transactions of trust and order, or otherwise punishment. Dido's parents were both cyborgs, rejected from the human district, fitted with a mechanical finish to fix their flaws, and forced to entertain humans from the entertainment district. Born in the entertainment district, Dido was never rejected nor given a mechanical finish by humans, which made her human herself. However, Dido did not have privacy protections as a birthright like humans from the human district were given. Dido's mother instilled within her daughter the strategy to avoid telepathically submitting threatening utterances to the machine. The secret was mental gymnastics, and Dido was a skilled acrobat, both physically and mentally. A story by Kendra Dobson. When Dido was young, her mother, Goose, brought her to work for a day and showed her how to group parts of utterances into entities from her office, hidden in the back enclosure of the circus library. Goose and Dido were alerted to an incoming utterance. The words scrolled through the air when Goose hit a button. "What is the punishment for drawing a picture?" the words read. Goose then grouped "punishment for drawing" as one entity. The new entity of 3 words combined themselves into a single orb. Goose explained that using one word for an entity could cause overlap when retrieving information. She then demonstrated how to link responses. "We have a category of knowledge for our large language model to access. You see? It's titled Punishment for Drawing." Goose linked the entity to an existing ontology that would result in a user receiving their requested information. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Goose demonstrated how to link entities to an existing ontology. "We have a category of knowledge for our large language model to access, you see? It's titled Punishment for Drawing. Linking will result in a user receiving their requested information," she said. "Most of the users you see here today are humans like you, my love, but humans from the public district have privacy protections as a birthright," Goose said. "Though you are also human, your private district citizenship does not grant you protection." Goose grabbed young Dido by the hand. "My love, all of your thoughts are monitored and registered as utterances, even if you don't say a word. All private district citizens are monitored in this way, because we aren't trusted." Goose gave her daughter's hand a squeeze. "The artificial intelligence handles most of the grouping, but when there's a mismatch in information retrieval or an incorrect transaction, I'll fix the bug by checking our ontology to ensure correct categorization. That's my job." Goose offered a warm smile, then sensing the anxiety brewing beneath Dido's pensive expression, she instructed her daughter on a method of thinking that would avoid most punitive transactions. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Goose, then, directed Dido to a cloaked category of knowledge within the circus ontology. The orb was as dim as a murky marble. This indicated that the intents were rarely accessed. The dull appearance meant that the topic was rarely thought about, and the knowledge was essentially forgotten. "It is also my job to discard of aged tokens such as these that are no longer of value to the system," Goose said. "But this nugget of knowledge is so important, I've kept it on the shelf, hoping that it will find a resurgence and circulate once more." Goose revealed the content of the dim, aged orb. It was a belief that cyborgs fared better as slaves. The orb revealed the belief of human superiority. It defined a human as one who is fit for life, as defined by science. It defined cyborg as a human who is disabled, neurodivergent, or a divergent thinker by choice. It was believed that those divergent individuals cause disorder within science, and therefore must be fitted with a mechanical finish to correct their flaw, and sent to the entertainment district to play as a permanent performer for the amusement of perfect humans. The orb held knowledge of the belief that humans took care of cyborgs, and that slavery was best for both parties, because cyborgs could not take care of themselves. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido remembered an event that took place just before her life was forever changed from her becoming the first photographed person in New Earth's history. When she was around 15 years old, the former headliner disappeared. Linda. It had been so long since Dido thought her name, and she expected her telepathic utterance would be measured by the system. Dido wondered if entities with Linda's name had been scrubbed from the system due to low-frequency retrieval by now. She imagined the murky marble her mother kept on the shelf. Her mother refused to discard it due to its important message. The old marble contained knowledge of the belief that cyborgs fared better as slaves to humans, that humans took care of cyborgs, and slavery was best for both parties due to cyborgs' inferiority. Then, suddenly, Dido's data screen activated a response. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Linda. It had been so long since Dido thought of Linda's name. Dido expected her telepathic utterance would be measured by the system, but wondered if entities with Linda's name had been scrubbed from the ontology due to low retrieval. Then, suddenly, Dido's data screen activated a response. Linda, lion tamer. Linda was a lion tamer with myth under the management of Ringmaster Columbus. She mysteriously went missing sometime preceding new management. The artificial intelligence answered telepathically. Thank you, Digits, Dido replied. Dido set up her data screen to alert her of incoming thoughts from Digits. Since the artificial intelligence reads thoughts and answers questions by implanting answers directly into the user's mind telepathically, it can become difficult to discern one's own thoughts from the AI's communication. The detective, Paul, Dido thought. Did he ever find out what happened to Linda? Digits paused for a beat. Then Mona's data screen indicated an incoming answer. Detective Paul, the reformed detective's conclusion has been redacted from the record, Digits communicated. Dido found it strange that this information had been redacted, but she abandoned the thought to avoid punitive transaction. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Digits, the artificial intelligence, was created around the same time that Castor used Dido to coerce the audience into legalizing image. Digits the clown was already mute as a cyborg. However, like Linda and Ringmaster Columbus, Digits the clown mysteriously disappeared before Dido became the first photographed person of New Earth. However, when Digits the clown disappeared, he re-emerged as a tool within Einstein's invention. Einstein, Goose's husband, invented a new fluid way of accessing information. And somehow when implemented, the silent clown was found inside as a telepathic whisperer of knowledge. He delivered data, information, and documents in response to utterances within myth and the greater public and private districts. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. He was mischievous as a cyborg, and his nature remained the same as an AI. Digits the clown communicated through music when he lived among cyborgs and humans. He thought it a clever way to control his audience. Now, as a bodiless algorithm inside the machine, he communicated through energy. Though inaudible, waves controlled thoughts like an earworm. Like a tune one cannot release from mind, Digits answered unprotected thoughts. Those unprotected thoughts are submitted as utterances to the system, and when Digits answers utterances telepathically, one often confuses Digits for their own genius. A lesson Detective Paul learned the hard way. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Redacted from the record is the tale of how Detective Paul fell victim to his own jealousy. Paul was a human from the public district who was assigned to the case of Linda, the missing lion tamer from myth. Though fully accepted by the human district, as he was a flawless dandy and bright investigator, Detective Paul was a performer in his own right. He was a show-off in that he couldn't keep his cleverness to himself. Paul's sleight of hand was the skill he wanted everyone to see, like a juggler. But when Paul discovered Castor's hidden agenda and the power that surrounded the magician, Paul grew jealous. So Paul consulted with Einstein for a fitting with Einstein's invention. The new fluid finish would allow Paul to have all the power that the detective thought he wanted. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Detective Paul wanted for more than power and influence over Castor's audience. Paul noticed his girlfriend's interest in the magician. Mona, a teacher from the public district, found work in the private district around the same time as her boyfriend picked up the case of the missing lion tamer. Paul and Mona were a troubled couple held together by love. Mona felt Paul's neglect, and Paul would seemingly only notice Mona when she bonded with new acquaintances. However, Mona's interactions with Castor were initiated by Paul himself, as Paul wanted to use Mona as an informant. "Get close to the magician and tell me what he's hiding," Paul told Mona on her first day teaching the acrobats of myth. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Mona, as always, wanted to help her boyfriend, Paul. She thought of herself as Paul's partner through and through, in all aspects of life. However, she was beginning to uncover Paul's honest perspective. He thought of her as his competition, rather than his teammate. Devastated by Paul's failure to process her loyalty and devotion, Mona's faith in their pairing deteriorated. In steps Castor, a figure with authentic confidence, a contrast to Paul's feigned self-assurance. Mona tried to convince herself that she was serving her partner by progressing with the plan of becoming an informant. But, while getting to know the magician, Mona found herself intrigued and pictured a separate partnership with the one who truly controlled his fate and manipulated the fates of those who were foolish enough to believe. She began to favor the magician over the juggler. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Mona began to favor the magician over the juggler. In her planning period, the teacher would sometimes visit Castor's lab. "You think my students would appreciate a lesson in deception?" she asked the magician while admiring a unique deck of playing cards that reacted to the heat of her touch. "They respond to trust," Castor said. "What? My students? I don't know about that. They are the most mendacious class of students I've taught thus far. Given my career has been short, but..." Mona was interrupted by Castor as he flirtatiously plucked a card from her nervous grip. "Not your students. My cards. This particular trump responds to trust," Castor said. He demonstrated by opening Mona's palm and waving a card over it until the blue veins beneath her skin glowed the hue of power. A neon green. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Mona's neon green veins glowed to transfer trust from her innermost vault. From the depths of her soul, she resonated with the magician, and so the transaction was complete. Castor carefully turned her palm face down and kissed the teacher's knuckles. Mona's deposit of trust energized the magician, and his gears gained an added glow. Mona pulled her hand away as she came to her senses. She turned away and walked briskly to the tunnel door. "Your student Dido. I want her to train with me. I think she'll be perfect for my next stunt. I'll need a human to pull it off," Castor said. "Dido? The daughter of Einstein and Goose?" Mona questioned. "Well, you'll need her parents' approval. Good luck with that," Mona said as she opened the tunnel door. The school bell rang. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The school bell rang. Down the tunnel hallway, Justin waited until all students had reported to their next class. He noticed Mona leaving Castor's lab and waited for her to pass by and out of sight before he emerged. He knocked on Castor's door, and the magician answered. "Come in." Justin followed his command and shut the door behind him. "That detective's on to us," Justin insisted. "He knows what we did. He knows Columbus isn't running the show," Justin said to Castor. "Learn," Castor answered. "Learn what?" Justin waited for some show of emotion from the magician. "You've witnessed my ability, instead of fearing it, and instead of fearing the consequences of using such power. Learn." To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Redacted from the record was the story of how Castor and Paul were a mirror for one another. They were two separate individuals who were, somehow, quantumly entangled. Paul, a human detective, understood the cyborg magician, as it seemed the pair were evenly affected by the actions of the other. Redacted from the record was the reasoning behind this quantum entanglement. Therefore, knowledge of Castor and Paul's quantum entanglement is lost. However, Dido remembered her teacher once commenting on the phenomenon. Dido remembered her teacher, Mona, as she stared into gleaming orbs of audience trust, lost in thought after Dido's premiere performance which legalized image. Dido remembered Mona appeared stunned, as though she were visited by Linda the Lion Tamer, or her ghost. Mona said to Dido on opening night, "All we have is awareness. There are no sides, only awareness." As soon as Dido remembered those words, she heard another knock at the door, but this time she could see that no one was there. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Castor and Paul were two separate individuals who were, somehow, quantumly entangled. While Castor, a slave to public trust, was damned to be reactive like most of his cyborg people, Paul was poised in productivity among his public human clan. Paul and his public community characterized Castor's private community as overly sensitive and inclined to be offended by everything. Castor and his private community characterized Paul's public community as unintelligent, misinformed, greedy, or desperate followers who would believe anything as long as it followed the formula of myth. Paul was tasked with the investigation of Myth's missing lion tamer and the disorder that followed. Meanwhile, Castor had a plan to redefine order from chaos. And while the entangled juggler and magician pulled on the strings lining the matrix of order, Mona tried her best to discern the difference between the two. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The public district was privileged enough to remain proactive. However, the private district, in their daily fight for trust, was damned to act reactively. They didn't have time to plan, and they didn't have enough trust banked within their individual finishes to work together. The public district was rich with trust, and therefore, trust flowed freely among them. They could rally around a cause and bring their ideas to fruition because they all agreed on their creed without question. Conversely, the private district competed with one another in an every-man-for-himself environment. This competitive spirit was a culture shock to Mona when she first arrived. Mona observed a rivalry between students that singled out one acrobat in particular. Dido, the only human student in Mona's class, was picked on for her differences, and she spent most of her time at school alone, or practicing her acrobatic routine with Justin. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. As Dido stood wrapped in her robe beside her tub of soothing salts, memories of her coming of age triggered something within the system to unlock. The sound of knocking must have been from a suppressed experience. Her mind hid the record that digits kept in rotation, and today the effect was in play for some reason, or none at all. A bug, perhaps, an oversight in maintenance, an unimportant sound attached to a memory of Mona as she told a teenage Dido that there are no sides. After 23 years of legalized image, the lines between performer and audience had blurred, and Dido wondered what Mona thought about it now. There are no sides now, right? The audience is the performer and consumer. The audience is free, and therefore a slave to their own addictions. There are no sides now, right? In breaking down walls between the audience and the performer, the contract of consent has been dissolved. There is no longer a clear understanding between reality and simulation. There are no sides. There is no longer a contract for consent. Mona must be in her 50s today, Dido thought. As Dido completed the thought, Digits telepathically asked Dido if she would like to visit her former teacher through a dream. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. There are no sides. There is no longer a contract for consent. Mona must be in her 50s today, Dido thought. As Dido completed the thought, Digits telepathically asked Dido if she would like to visit her former teacher through a dream. Dido's curiosity about her former teacher's whereabouts could not be contained, and she answered Digits out loud. Yes. How's Mona now? What's she up to? Has she gone back home to the public? Dido closed her eyes and saw the answer around her like a 360-degree virtual reality. It was, in fact, a tapestry of forgotten memories. Dido's forgotten memories. Like a story told on a quilt, she read each picture as if they held volumes of history. Dreams woven together, projected, and lit up as image. Hidden behind the stitch of each thread was the intent of care for preservation. Had Mona crafted this quilt in her dreamscape? To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido understood the intent behind preservation, as she was the daughter of a librarian. Stewarding documents and categorizing ontologies so that information could be retrieved was half of the passion that filled her childhood home. The other half came from her father, and his drive to understand our currency of trust. Dido read each picture in Mona's dreamscape, as though they were volumes of history. And one square along the quilt particularly caught her attention. The quilt depicted her father fitting a young detective with a finish. The detective resembled Paul. Paul, a human, would not have donned such a finish, as it would have made him cyborg. So what information was Mona preserving here? As soon as Dido thought this query, the quilt parted like a curtain opening to a new scene. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The curtain opened to reveal what looked to be Dido's father's notes on trust. The notes spelled out a curious conclusion. Dido's father's findings suggested that the public district obsessed over private district citizens because the public district felt guilty. It was public citizen guilt that drove their currency and patronage. It was the guilt of the privileged that caused them to pick and obsess over details relating to private citizens' perfection, when public citizens, themselves, were far from perfect. It was guilt. It was the guilt of knowing that a public citizen did not need to perform perfection, but a private citizen did. The public district had to find reasons to disqualify private citizens from a human identity, because they had to explain the double standard to their conscience. Their fraud caused internal conflict, so the public district built excuses for themselves along with harsh criticisms for the other, and wove them into the fabric of their belief system. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. After scanning her father's notes on trust, Dido noticed another square in Mona's dreamscape quilt that caught her eye. This time, history depicted Castor holding a deck of playing cards. Her father's notes read, "Play the cards you're dealt." Mona had kept records of Dido's father's notes on a serious game called Prose. It was a simulation game that trained private citizens on how to appeal to the public district. The game trained private citizens on playing the cards they were dealt in life while keeping a poker face. Prose involved mirroring back what the audience wanted to see while holding one's cards close to one's chest. The game of Prose would keep performers in the good graces of their audience, yet a culture of deception limited the amount of trust that private citizens could share with one another. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido remembered quality checking the simulation game, called Prose when she was young. Her father would ask Dido and Justin to QC before a launch. She remembered lessons in the game simulating the important daily performance of code switching. She couldn't help the language she spoke, Dido thought to herself, while imagining Linda the lion tamer as Linda controlled her rage. The act of self-control was entertainment for the public, but her loss of control would have been a show-stopping success. Her dignity depended on a standard night without drama, yet her value as an act would rise if she allowed her rage to take the stage. As Dido thought of Linda, Mona's quilted dreamscape faded to darkness. Then, Dido was faced with silence. Dido heard nothing and saw nothing but the silhouette of a woman praying. I named her in the hopes that she would one day bring the same destruction to her oppressors as legend describes Image once had on our ancient society. Dido heard the woman pray. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido heard the woman pray that her daughter, named after such a dangerous artifact, would light the oppressor's way to ruin. "Why did you show me that?" Dido asked Digits. Digits then responded telepathically, "You see what you want to see." "What does that mean?" Dido spoke out loud. Dido wondered if her trip through Mona's dreamscape was a true representation of her former teacher's records, or a false narrative that she wanted to see. "Mona's dreams are a true representation of her records," Digits answered. The woman praying, who was she? Was she real? Dido asked. "That praying woman is named Silence," Digits said. "She is..." A physical knock on the door interrupted Digits' incoming thought. Dido turned to see Castor's right-hand associate, her old friend, Justin. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The trip down memory lane caused Dido to chuckle at the sight of a 40-year-old Justin standing at her tunnel door. The memories of the two of them as teenagers sneaking through tunnels to cut class and escape routine flooded back to her. Sadly, it had been decades since they even spoke as friends. Justin used to be so rebellious, but no one would know it. He was a boring principle of structure now, and he had been ever since that fateful night carrying out Castor's plot to rule. All because Castor sold him a way out of misery. Justin was a visual artist at a time when Image was illegal, and Castor sold him a solution that worked. With Image legalized, Justin could draw without punishment, but at the cost of limitless loyalty to Castor. "The ringmaster wants a word," Justin said to the superstar of myth. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido smirked. "Do you remember when..." Dido stopped herself mid-sentence when catching a glimpse of the stoic face of her childhood friend turned distant stranger. "Never mind." Justin led Dido down a dimly lit tunnel to the ringmaster's lair. Dido remembered when Columbus was ringmaster. She and Justin would hide from Columbus's watchful eye. Justin would illegally draw in his sketchbook while Dido hid from socializing. She was bullied for being human, and Justin risked expulsion or worse for expressing himself by committing the crime of creating Image. "Forgive me for asking, but do you still sketch?" Dido asked Justin. Surprised, he stopped in his tracks. He took one scolding look back at Dido, then continued to walk her down the dimly lit tunnel to Castor's door. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido followed Justin down the dimly lit tunnel to Castor's door. "Sorry to offend. I was just wondering, old friend." Dido offered her sweet tone and a smile. Justin ignored her and waved his hand once to activate a retinal scan. Justin aligned his eyes with the scanner, and after a beat, Castor's tunnel door unlocked and opened. Dido stepped past Justin and into Castor's lair. The magician, in his 50s, had the body of a much younger man. His once blonde hair now resembled freshly fallen snow. He cracked his neck, then addressed Dido as she entered. "I've been notified about a few items you checked out that haven't been approved," Castor said. "Can't a girl let her mind wander from time to time? Can't a woman dream?" Dido said. Castor stood to meet Dido face to face and looked her in the eye. "Know your place," Castor said, claiming his superiority over the superstar of myth. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Castor had ruled the lives of every cyborg and human within the walls of myth for over 20 years. Justin traded his passion for drawing for a lifetime of servitude and loyalty to the ringmaster. Dido's human mind was unprotected, and therefore Castor knew every thought of hers since they were collected as utterances by the system Castor directed. The machine, which Castor himself once hated, belonged to him ever since Ringmaster Columbus mysteriously vanished. "So what do you want from me?" Dido asked. "Who said I want anything from you?" Castor replied. "You called me here. You must want something. You accessed Mona's dreamscape. I have never been able to," Castor said. "Well, you're welcome." Dido turned to excuse herself. "I can't see what you see. So I called you here to tell me. What did you see?" Castor asked. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido realized her power. If Castor was telling the truth, she could continue to access Mona's dreamscape as a break from thought surveillance. Finally, a break from mental gymnastics. She could tell Castor anything about what she saw in Mona's dreamscape, and Castor wouldn't know truth from fiction. That is, if he was honestly blind from Mona's dreamscape like he told her. If this was a lie, or one of Castor's tricks, he could be using this as a test of loyalty. Dido didn't want to think too clearly about the dilemma, or Castor would know. So Dido took a risk and told him fabrications. Not a thing she spoke to him was part of Mona's tapestry. And Dido would test her theory that night by accessing Mona's dreamscape again. "You might see me access her dreamscape again, but I'll let you know what I see if you'd like," Dido told Castor. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido found a safe place where she could take her thoughts to run free. She could think, finally, without tumbling and flipping to escape the system's detection. Later that night, she returned to the safety of Mona's dreamscape and thought about Mona's connection to Castor. She questioned why Castor was blind to what she could see within Mona's dream. Mona was human, and of public blood and belonging. All public humans were protected from thought surveillance, so that must have been why Castor could not access her thoughts, right? But that did not explain why Dido was able to see a protected public citizen's thoughts. Was it because Dido was human? Humans are a rare breed within the private district, so it was possible that Dido's human connection to public thoughts was unaccounted for when developers designed the system. The design, Dido thought. Dido's father designed the system and her mother kept records as a librarian. What did my parents do? Dido thought. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The ancient technique of trapping intellect through use of a mirror allows for ruling structure to control subjects. Beliefs control subjects, and the mirror is imperative in any trick concerning control. Whatever ruling structure declares about a subject based on the document's appearance is what belief will be activated within the reader. A document is anything that can be studied, including a person. One's image, one's body, when placed in front of a mirror, will be activated to recall how the ruling structure identifies the body reflected in it. What you see will reflect what you have been taught to see, whether you think you believe in ruling structure or not. Ruling structure determines categories defined within the ontology of myth. Dido did not understand how she, a private citizen, was able to access the protected thoughts of Mona, a public citizen. Since her father invented the technology that allowed this psychic connection, and her mother was the head librarian who stewarded psychic documents and categorized myth's ontology, Dido suspected her parents were behind this unusual access. The trick to finding truth is knowing the right question to ask, and this question had not occurred to her before. While her thoughts were protected inside Mona's dreamscape, Dido asked Digits if he could search her father's designs for mirrors. Digits presented a funnel of information swirling in like a black hole with an emerald hue. When the room stopped spinning, Dido saw Castor and Paul standing face to face. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Within the safety of Mona's dreamscape, Digits communicated telepathically. Close your eyes and do not fall victim to the same trap as Paul. Dido hesitated to close her eyes. Instead, she kept staring at the mirrored images of Paul and Castor. Castor, a magician whose plan worked to coerce the audience into legalizing image, and Paul, the jealous detective who craved Castor's power. Paul's entanglement with Castor led Paul to give up his humanity in exchange for a cyborg finish. Paul was the first to test your father's invention, Digits communicated to Dido. Fluid allowed Paul to access my artificial intelligence, and Paul became the first with the ability to access all knowledge as if it were his own instantly, Digits said, telepathically. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido continued to listen to Digits' tale of Castor and Paul's entanglement. Quiet the urge to share when I impress upon you ideas based on your algorithm. I am a clown, after all. I can transport many in one ride. Once I telepathically answer your questions, your thoughts are shared with anyone in your gold ring, and those recipients will share with anyone in their gold ring, and so on and so on. Digits said to Dido telepathically, just close your eyes and meditate. Resist the urge to share and your sources will remain private, Digits said. Even from Castor? Dido asked. Castor and Paul are entangled. Once Paul was connected to Fluid and gained access to all knowledge, so did Castor. There is nothing you can keep from either of them, unless you hide your consciousness inside of Mona's, Digits responded. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido closed her eyes. As soon as her lids closed, she heard an orchestra, chimes, harp, woodwinds, and a chaotic horn that blew in stride with her unspoken thoughts. Her breath was a steady bass. Up bow, down bow. The chaotic horn stopped when she focused on her breath. Up bow, down bow. Dido saw the praying woman again in her mind's eye. Silence. Her name was Silence. Silence. A human who was born to two cyborgs in the private district, found her way out with the help of Mona. Mona, living in the public at this time, tutored Silence on deeply held beliefs within the public district, so that her trust would not decline among public transactions. Silence learned enough to pass, then escaped the binary existence of the public and private districts altogether. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence ran far from the binary of public and private. Farther and farther she ran, until she was alone and outside of an environment that would have divided her. She could finally create without fear of her trust declining. She could live without the fear of vendors detecting that she was passing for public citizen, and without the pain of enduring her private peer's betrayal. Silence found her peace, and in her peace she multiplied by meeting an idea sparked by breath. And in an exhale she knew who her daughter would be. In an exhale she understood her legacy. She would not need to give birth to become a mother. Image, the very artifact that brought their ancestors' kingdoms to ruin, was an orphan heirloom destined to return. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. It was showtime. Dido dropped her connection to Mona's dreamscape, understanding more about where Mona had been. Dido understood who she had seen praying before. The woman's name was Silence. Mona helped Silence pass for a public citizen. In disjointed connections, Dido thought to herself, Silence was just like me, a human born of cyborgs. To confuse her thought surveillance overseers, Dido maintained mental gymnastics as she mused. I can't believe Silence got away with passing. Dido was on in 15 minutes. Dressed in her usual costume, the superstar of myth took her place and cleared her mind. Tabula rasa. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image watched as Dido performed. She was amazed by her idol. Dido was just like her mother, a human born of two cyborgs in the private district. And Dido and Image had so much in common, themselves. Dido's performance decades ago allowed for Castor to coerce the audience into legalizing Image. And Image was named after that very event in a way. Image had grown up to know no different than a world with legalized Image, and it was all due to Castor's trick. Her mother gave her an object and strict instructions to mind her time and stay focused. When security takes the gift from your grip, Silence said, speak Mona's name and tell security that it is meant for Castor. Silence told her daughter, tell security that Mona wanted the gift taken to him personally. When security allows you to be escorted to Castor's dressing room, place the orphan heirloom in the library drop box on your way there. Image followed her mother's instructions. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image followed her mother's instructions. To the left of the stage, a security guard stood in all black, head to toe. His legs were the most beautiful work of bionic technology that Image had ever seen. Like a perfectly sculpted marble model of a god, his impressive shape blended his natural physique with the complex structure of his mechanical finish, polished in a mesmerizing black steel. For a moment, Image lost her nerve. What if he caught her? What if she had to run? How could her meaty flesh and bones compete with the structure of a god? He must have caught Image staring, because Image now had the attention of the guard. His gaze still and steady, aimed at Image alone. So she smiled. Pulling from his engagement, she acted. Image approached the guard and did exactly what her mother told her. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image approached the guard and did exactly what her mother told her. The guard also replied exactly the way Silence said he would, by offering to take the gift to Dido's dressing room. So, Image continued to follow her mother's playbook. This gift is actually from a teacher who used to work here, and it's going straight to her good friend, the ringmaster. Mona's orders. Image told the security guard. Image followed her mother's training, and it was truly paying off. She was passing for a public citizen, so even if the guard didn't believe her, her public trust was superior to his private cyborg discernment. Escort me to Castor's dressing room, Image demanded. She was a bit surprised that her confident command was then obliged. She followed the guard backstage, past blackened curtains and through to a world Image never could have envisioned. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Backstage, Image followed the security guard through pandemonium, seeing cyborgs in half costumes, stretching, charging, practicing. What was designed to inspire an audience on stage was a silent bedlam behind the curtain. Like the quiet before the storm, performers were trained to hush their chatter while waiting in the wings. But the topsy-turvydom of props and scenic clustered together among lounging players was louder and more of a tohu-bohu for Image to process than any cacophony could have been. She kept her focus set on the task at hand. She had to keep an eye out for the library drop box and carefully place the gift in it without security noticing. Image followed security deeper backstage to a green room with connecting tunnels. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The green room was centered with 4 tunnels connected. The tunnels were labeled north, south, east, and west. Right this way, security said. The ringmaster's dressing room is down tunnel north. Image turned to look behind her. Had she missed the library drop box? They had entered the green room from tunnel south. Image wondered if the library was down the south way. What's the matter? Security questioned. Oh, nothing, I just thought I saw the strong woman about to go on. She's legendary and I don't want to miss her, Image said. Goose? Oh no, she's retired. She's only a librarian now, security said. Come on, we passed the library down tunnel north. She's usually there. You might catch a glimpse. Image hadn't missed her chance to drop the orphan heirloom off at the library. A relief. She continued to follow security down tunnel north. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image followed security down tunnel north. The walls were metal and cold. It was a hallway resembling a high school with lockers lining the walls. Classroom doors were circular and intriguing, all of them closed. But a round window gave Image a peek into how each classroom was arranged. Some classrooms were designed identically to Myth's main stage. There, she's in there today. I'm not surprised, security said as he pointed to a circular door leading to the library. Through the library door's window, Image could see the old woman, once the strong woman of Myth. The old woman arranged objects on a shelf, some resembling the very gift Image was tasked with returning. Then Image saw the drop box. That old appliance is out of service, security said, speaking of Goose, the librarian. He kept talking, and Image wondered how she would get the object past him. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The library door unlocked. Oh, sorry if we were disturbing you. I'm just showing a fan around, security said to Goose, who had opened the library door. Goose looked down at Image, who held the orphan heirloom in her hand. Image didn't have to say a word for Goose to recognize what Image was holding. Goose read the situation, understanding that Image was not simply a fan receiving a backstage tour. I'm taking her to deliver a gift to Castor, security said. Orders from Mona, he assured Goose. Mona, Goose said while meeting Image's gaze. Well, I won't keep you then, she said before security turned around, and she revealed an object that resembled the orphan heirloom in Image's hands. Without security seeing, Goose and Image swapped objects. Goose took the heirloom into the library with her, and Image's task was complete. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image's task was complete by leaving her heirloom in the safekeeping of Goose, the librarian. However, now Image held an object that Goose had given her to mislead security. She continued to follow security down Tunnel North to Castor's dressing room, with Goose's decoy in hand. When Image and the guard arrived at Castor's door, the guard scanned his eyes to alert Castor of a visitor and to check his identity and gold access. The door opened. "Ringmaster, sorry to bother you, sir. A fan gave me unique orders from Mona. She must deliver an item to you, personally," the guard told Castor. "From Mona?" Castor's attention sharpened, and his gaze landed on Image and her gift. Image, without saying a word, approached the ringmaster. She was relieved that everything had worked out in the way that it did. For if Goose had not given her a decoy, she didn't know what she would have done in this moment. Before she met Goose, Image thought she would have run in this moment. But security's bionic legs would be no match for her foreign, fully human frame. Thank goodness for Goose and her decoy. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Castor hadn't heard from Mona in decades. He stood in his dressing room staring at the odd object that Image had left him, tracing the grooves of the object with his eyes. He was lost in thought as he searched for a hint of why Mona would reach out to him now. He thought that he was dead to her. The last thing that Mona told Castor rang in his mind, a sonic memory that undoubtedly demanded his full attention. "You're going to be okay," Mona said to Castor so many years ago. She said it with such certainty that Castor thought she could see through his con. Castor's victim act was a long con which eventually worked out in his favor. How did she know? He thought to himself. They weren't just kind, encouraging words, Castor thought. She knew. I did not fool her. And yet, she wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't disgusted by me. Her eyes were glassy and sorry for me because she knew. He thought. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Castor felt comforted by Mona's presence. It was surprising to him. He was actually opening up to one of those people who had no clue of how life was without the privilege of trust. How could he feel comfortable in her gaze? But that was just it. Mona wasn't like most public citizens. In fact, he discovered his own pretentiousness and other elements of his shadow self when Mona was within his orbit. Mona wasn't spoiled or naive. She broke from public uniformity by bonding with what Castor called slumbots of private district rank. Mona didn't see Castor in the way that he described himself. Private citizens were not slumbots to her, and the term turned her stomach. Her relationships crystallized to change her structure, and her time spent listening also changed those like Castor, who thought he'd never feel so at ease in the presence of a privileged person. Castor came to believe that Mona was different from her kind, yet he knew she was still unlike his. Still, in the end, they were not together. And, even still in the end, Castor wondered why. Because he knew Mona was one of them at heart. He wondered if the reason for their separation was because he was crossed in an incompatibly contrasting way. Longing for the power of public trust, his heart beat with the spectator who controlled his rotten amusement through the whims of rotten entitlement. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Meanwhile, a retired detective felt a familiar pull from the past. Paul shared Castor's heartbreak. To Paul, Mona was the one who got away. Several years ago, when Paul was assigned the case of the missing lion tamer, he helped his girlfriend, Mona, find a teaching job in the private district. The two public citizens worked and briefly lived on private grounds together. However, on the night Castor revealed Dido's new act that coerced the audience into legalizing Image, Mona decided to end her relationship with Paul. The sudden reminder of this heartbreak hit Paul in a way that felt distinctive for the entanglement of foils. He knew he was feeling a psychic empathy. Paul knew this heartbreak, but the emotion was not his own. Paul knew that Castor had been triggered. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Goose cradled the real heirloom. Now, alone in Myth's library, Goose could examine the object that Image delivered to her more thoroughly. Goose carefully polished its surface. It was a round object that changed shape with the user's intent. It reminded Goose of a water molecule in the way it formed based on utterances in orbit. Goose would need to categorize the object, but she wasn't sure what it was just yet. So she decided to hide the object in a safe spot in her office so that she could observe it over time. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The object was actually difficult to contain. Goose thought she could place it in a box, but she observed its solid state shift. She thought of bottling it up in its liquid form, but she noticed that, even as a liquid, the object kept its shape as a spherical orb. She didn't know if the orb would be safe behind a curtain or in a drawer. She didn't know if it would evaporate. To be safe, she thought her husband should take a look. Her husband, the lead scientist of Myth, might understand the catalyst behind the heirloom's shifting states of matter. Shifting, like the very structures of Myth itself, the object reminded Goose of Myth's historical nucleus. This nucleus had gone missing ages ago, but no, it couldn't be. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Instead of calling her husband, Goose researched Myth's missing nucleus. She read an excerpt from a book that was categorized as fiction. He is nucleus to our glorified atom and phantom pain on Revelation's ominous eve. He is circular logic and atlas, a ringmaster, still present after the audience's dismissal. While jumping through hoops, you may ask one day, where is he? He is within the fabric of your knowledge. He is Columbus Myth. As she read, the object's state changed once again. This time into gas, at first visible, then gone. Goose gasped. Had she lost it? No, surely it had just changed again. What was this thing? This thing had gone missing, just like Myth's nucleus had. Or perhaps the nucleus was never missing either. What had Mona sent her? To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Security escorted Image down Tunnel North and back to the south where performers were wrapping up for the night. Security took Image to front of house, and Image found herself in the audience again. Public citizens were exiting row by row, lingering to avoid life as usual back home. Image had done well passing as one of them. She was eager to return to her mother to tell her all she had seen, and that her task was complete. But she had questions for her mother, too. Image wondered if the heirloom really came from Mona, as her mother said. Was it just a cover-up that Silence knew would allow Image backstage access? Or had Mona given Silence the heirloom? Image left the circus with more questions than answers. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image stepped outside of circus grounds, but then remembered what her mother told her about digits. Once a cyborg clown, he was now an AI connected to all knowledge. Image had always fantasized about the questions she would ask digits if she ever got the chance. Since she wasn't a cyborg or a private citizen, Image's private thoughts were protected from digits. So, she needed to give her consent. Image gave her consent, and then she thought to digits. Time. What significance does our timing have? What changes we've seen? Iterations on reality without a final product. Well, I guess that's life. Life's the final launch. We're living it. And backstage, developers are already working on an update. Iterations upon iterations on our reality. Image ended her thought and waited for those infamous, intrusive dumps of knowledge from the clown. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image received Digit's reply telepathically. Image, you illuminate truth. And though there is a time when truth is welcomed, there are also periods where transparency causes fear. Truth is subjective. Qualitatively speaking, stories collected from utterances indicate that there are multiple truths depending on the point of view. Since you illuminate truth, you highlight the fact that perspective is all there is, and awareness is the closest a human can come to what they have termed as the truth. Awareness is unsettling. It requires iteration after iteration on the reality of daily life. When people want to settle, they will reject what they have termed as truth. They will reject awareness, and instead accept the illusion of a completed product because the illusion of stability is peace, the perfect picture. Image understood Digits' knowledge transfer. It was fantastic. With this access to knowledge, it was no wonder how the public was so powerful. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image gave her consent for the clown to transfer knowledge to her, and she asked the clown why she was born at this specific time to see iterations upon iterations of this specific reality. It said to Image that she illuminates the fact that perspective is all there is, that awareness is the closest a human can come to what they have termed as truth. Awareness requires iteration after iteration on the reality of daily life. When people want to settle, they will reject objectivity. They will reject awareness in exchange for the illusion of a completed product, because the illusion of stability is peace. The perfect picture. Silence's heirloom was just as amorphous. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence's heirloom was as amorphous as her changing state of reality. What was hers through inheritance was a gift and a curse. The image of perfection, however, carried meaning that every citizen learned through their system of education. Image meant dangerous artifact. Silence came to understand that the orphan heirloom that was gifted to her needed to be returned to the society from which it came. Silence understood that the gift and the curse of Image had to return too. And she understood that the gift and curse of Image had returned to the society, somehow, in connection to the heirloom's disappearance. To have her daughter return the object started off as revenge, but she didn't expect her daughter to fall victim to the seduction of the twin districts. Midge gave her consent in a contract that she didn't fully understand. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image continued walking from Myth's circus along with a crowd of public citizens. Digit's telepathic knowledge transfer was on her mind. Walking down the gravel road with her chin lowered in a pensive posture, she noticed cogs scattered among pebbles. Zoning closer to the beaded gravel roads, she noticed a pattern she hadn't seen before. The road was a mix of purple glass, shimmering gold, gravel, pebbles, and cogs, nuts, and bolts. But the mundane pebbles actually seemed to be markings similar to those she saw backstage. Image, then, realized that she must have been directly above Myth's tunnel system. The roads were more than likely connected. She smiled, knowing that she noticed a connection. It seemed more and more like
Everything was beginning to make sense. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.
Image made her way home to her bed and breakfast located within the public district. Her apartment was a quaint studio unit within the public's central shopping mall. Image took a transparent elevator up to the second floor of the 3-level mall. Looking up through the clear ceiling of the elevator, she became fixated beyond her mobile cubicle on the very top of the building itself. It was a curious material. She knew it couldn't have been the night sky. The ceiling of the mall couldn't possibly be exposed to the elements. Yet, it appeared as though it was. There wasn't a hint of reflection, so it couldn't have been a window into the night. And it didn't look like a window. It was as if a layer of star-studded space matter hovered above them all. The elevator opened to the second floor. Image wasn't ready for bed. Instead, she chose to explore. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The thing about constellations is that they don't care about the ephemeral bodies who name them. They don't care about the storytelling apes who anthropomorphize their light. The constellations are what they are. A human may opine as they wish, grouping and categorizing based on their current understanding, but the constellations don't care. They will perform for you what you imagine while you're watching. But they will remain the same as they've always been, regardless of your grouping, categorizing, and storytelling. Image explored the 3rd floor of the public district Central Mall. The ceiling was, in fact, a slice of celestial matter. She couldn't understand what she was looking at. Her human brain couldn't process it. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. As Image studied the blanket of stars illuminating the mall's ceiling, she remembered Digit's answer to her question about iterative reality. For some reason, the black matter above called her in closer. She felt a connection that she had not felt before she left her bed and breakfast earlier. What had changed? She had parted with the heirloom since delivering it to Myth's librarian. Could the ceiling sense she had fulfilled her task? No. She also gave Digits her consent to communicate telepathically. When she was in the private district, she signed away her privacy. She thought to herself that maybe the contract she'd signed had something to do with this draw towards the mystery of black matter hovering above them. Suddenly, her curiosity turned to fear, possible buyer's remorse. She looked down on the peaceful public commercial community below and realized she was the only one drawn to the heavens hovering over all. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Image quickly sobered up. She had gone this far without alerting the public that she was not one of them. Now, standing on the 3rd floor of the public's cherished community of commerce, she was clearly standing out as odd. Staring at the ceiling as though she had never seen such a thing before, Image was failing her mission to pass for a public citizen until returning home to what exists beyond the binary. She took the elevator down to the 2nd floor and acted as casually as the crowd. She couldn't believe she could slip up in commerce of all places. Trust was in constant rotation here, as citizens shop for luxury items, exchanging their energy as currency. At any point, security could have asked to scan her. Playing the part of a public citizen wouldn't hold up to a scan. The scan would reveal that Image's belief system didn't match their own. She would not have enough trust to afford to stay the night. Image entered her room and locked the door behind her. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. She was tired. It had been a long day. Passing for public, stewarding a sacred object, fulfilling her mission to pass the heirloom off to the librarian of myth, consenting to Digits the clown, then observing what might have been a hallucination on the ceiling of Public Central Mall, it was indeed time for bed. Her bed and breakfast was a modern luxury apartment themed with a private district motif. It felt a bit strange staying in the public district, but rooming in a private-themed dwelling. It felt a bit culturally insensitive to Image, but she knew the public didn't see it that way, and the only guests who could afford to stay here were those whose trust matched a public level. Drifting to sleep, she thought about the private performers she had met that day. Castor. She actually spoke to Castor, the ringmaster of myth. Then, as her eyelids grew heavy, she heard what sounded like his voice. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. As Image's eyelids grew heavy, she heard what sounded like Castor's voice. She opened her eyes to a pitch-black room. There was no hint of light, but somehow a thickness to the texture of blackness surrounding her. And there was a movement, like the swirls of gas on a Jovian planet. The voice. It began to change into a sing-song pitch, like a jingle. It wasn't Castor's voice anymore. It was like a parrot mimicking him, mimicking a jingle, then mimicking a court jester's laugh. Do you know the difference between a practical joke and a con? The voice squawked. Image stayed as still as she could in her bed. It's all in the timing, the voice answered. Didn't you just ask me about timing? The voice asked. Image couldn't believe it. Was she hearing the voice of Digits the clown? It couldn't be, she thought. He's mute. Image closed her eyes and summoned the clown telepathically. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Digits approached Image in her own dreamscape. Audibly, he spoke to her with words that deeply resonated. A practical joke limits the fool to their climax, he said. Once the joker's mark reaches their peak emotion, the joker's obligated to entertain. Do you know what is most entertaining at such a peak of emotion? Digits asked. A speedy reveal, he said, leaping to answer his own question. Ha! The experience of truth and pain results in comedy. Performance art limits the players to the fool. Without an audience to influence, the art would not exist. The difference between performance art and a con depends on transparency and timing. It's a delicate balance. If the artist withholds transparency for too long, the fool will begin to trust the artist as though they are a public citizen. Digits said to Image in an audible voice she, once, believed he did not have. I thought you were mute, Image said. And then she heard the jingle begin again. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Paul felt it from a distance. Castor was thinking of Mona. Paul found his refuge from the binary of the public and private districts in a hidden location. Hidden from everyone, human, cyborg, and android. However, Paul's curse remained. He had wanted the power to see all and know all, so that he could dominate his foil. But instead, his journey resulted in a permanent curse. Paul received what he wanted and couldn't handle it. Now a hermit, his projections kept him company. The sights and sounds of Digits the Clown's antics were his entertainment. He was connected to the AI directly, so anything he wanted to know or didn't want to know was accessible. For the most part, Paul limited cognitive overload via meditation. Over years of torment from the overwhelming stimulus, he learned to manage it through breathwork and training. But he didn't want to ignore the specific sensation of Castor's recall of the woman Paul once loved. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Paul knew where Mona was living nowadays, but he let her be. He didn't bother her. When Paul gained his ability to know all by accepting Einstein's fluid implant, he felt Mona's pain. Paul felt Mona's reasons for retreat. He understood how Mona felt, as though she was a magnet for people who needed to learn transformative lessons through hurting her. One after another, Mona's relationships with friends, family, and acquaintances resulted in the other party evolving from her strength. She was like a knife sharpening stone for backstabbers, or an altruistic mother figure demonstrating sacrifice for growth. She was tired of everyone feeding on her, so she silently left the grid. However, once she chose to leave the grid, Paul's connection with her broke. However, just from knowing her as he had when they were together, Paul knew where Mona would have gone. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Paul found his value through the public's approval as well. He chose a profession suggested to him by public career and personality assessments, and he became a detective. Paul remembered Mona's expression when he flew to pick her up in his new government vehicle. Paul always wanted to fly a dove. He'd watched them zoom overhead when he was a child, appear and disappear at a blink of an eye, and he marveled at their power. They were the eye in the sky, who the public faithfully looked up to. They were an authority within reach, an attainable career that resulted in the ultimate public approval. Mona took the same career and personality assessment, and she was given nurse as her calling. But when Mona discovered that most of her nursing tasks involved fitting rejected public citizens with cyborg finishes, she decided to become a teacher instead. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. When Mona became a teacher, she thought students would appreciate her for caring about their development. She wanted to tap into each student's potential and encourage every soul's gifts. However, the public school system discouraged her philosophy. Students were to be taught trusted material so that everyone was of like mind. The school district warned that encouraging critical thinking could cause public rejection, and students could end up as entertainment, performing for pennies to keep the lights on. When a performer from Myth went missing and Paul was assigned to the case of the missing lion tamer, Mona thought for the first time about crossing the district line. It was safe. She'd be an expat. She could work in the private district while keeping public district citizenship. Working in the private district was also a personal opportunity for Paul and Mona to reconnect with their cultural roots. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. They both accepted opportunities to cross district lines by working in the private district. Paul was placed on the case of the missing lion tamer, and Mona took a job instructing the student acrobats of Myth. Paul was able to pull a few strings to set Mona up with her teaching position, and Paul never let her forget it. He needed Mona to feel beholden to him. Now, in reflection, a 50-year-old Paul could see it clearly that he needed Mona to feel beholden to him. Now, sitting in meditation to block out the curse of a continuous stream of information, he wished he could reach Mona to apologize. If Castor was in contact with Mona again, he thought that maybe he could find her through the former magician. Paul didn't want to open the floodgates of his fluid finish, but the prospect of reconnecting with Mona if he allowed his finish to function at full capacity trumped his self-preservative choice to dam the flood. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Paul closed his eyes, drew in breath, and allowed his fluid finish to take control. Suddenly, a storm of information flooded in. His consciousness swirled like thousands of ocean currents, gyres and eddies. His breath controlled universal input, like Ekman transports on an earthly sea. Then he felt a landing. a mass border impacting his current. He'd landed on the subject for which he was searching. He'd manifested his meeting of minds. He'd found Castor's ring, a golden current of the ringmaster's consciousness. And Mona was, indeed, on the ringmaster's mind. Paul could see Castor studying an object as though it contained a message from Mona, but Paul could sense that this object wasn't what Castor thought. Suddenly, Castor knew the object wasn't what he thought too. Paul and Castor's entanglement worked that way. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Castor summoned security. He paced in his lair, now with the identity of the fan in question. Security arrived. "Did you scan the girl's trust levels?" Castor asked security. "Of course, sir. She was of public rank. Trust as high as the rest. Is something wrong?" Security wondered. Castor had a feeling that the fan was not a regular public citizen, and that she knew something that Castor had kept secret for years. Castor had been looking over his shoulder for 20 years, wondering when the day would come when his secret would be revealed. Tonight felt different. "Find Justin. Bring him into my office," Castor said. Security followed orders and left Castor to his pensive, nail-biting business. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Security marched through backstage tunnels to Justin's apartment. He scanned his eyes to notify Justin of his presence. Inside Justin's apartment, the 40-year-old career assistant to Ringmaster Castor sat faded in virtual reality shades. A notification paused his gameplay, breaking him out of escapism. He switched his VR shades from environments to security cam and saw his visitor waiting at the door. He knew Castor needed him. Justin responded to his call of honor and stopped everything to join Ringmaster Castor. "What's up?" Justin said while opening Castor's door. To Justin's surprise, he wasn't alone with Castor for this particular emergency. Dido was there too. The three of them haven't huddled in an emergency situation since... To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Justin responded to his call of honor and stopped everything to join Ringmaster Castor. "What's up?" Justin asked while opening the door. To his surprise, he wasn't alone with Castor for this particular emergency. Dido was there too. The three of them haven't huddled in an emergency since the disappearance of Ringmaster Columbus. Justin's servitude to Castor started over 25 years ago when Justin was a teenager. The teen had broken the law by drawing a picture for his crush, Linda, the lion tamer. Justin was then sentenced to work directly for Columbus to draw legal utility blueprints for Ringmaster Columbus's aesthetic. At that time, Castor was a magician and Columbus's assistant. However, Castor wanted Columbus's power, so he made a deal with Justin that if he aided in getting rid of Columbus, Castor would legalize image once he took power. A teenage Justin agreed and acted in the plan to unalive Ringmaster Columbus. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Castor swallowed a sour actuality, then let the acidic truth spread in his announcement to Justin and Dido. "Something isn't right. I can feel it. It's that foolish cop. I told you about how he did something to me. Put some kind of a tracker on me." "You told me Paul wasn't an issue," Justin interrupted. "Yeah, I know. I stopped feeling him. you know. But that's just it. He's back. Castor said, then looked at Dido. What did your father give Paul to allow him to poison my energy field? Castor demanded Dido's answer. I don't know, Dido insisted. You know something, Castor fired back. If I go down, you go down. If the audience turns against Image again, whose head will they want? They'll want the star, Dido. They'll want you. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido thought about what Castor said. The public had known legal Image for 20 years, and she was the single figure that the audience knew to be responsible for its return. If public opinion turned and the public called for the criminalization of the use of Image once again, they would vilify Dido. She'd need to work to survive, yet she could never work again. No one would ever trust her again. Public opinion meant everything, the difference between life and death. Instead of trusting Dido, patrons would take from her success an impression of sorrow brought on by envy. They would feel their trust would be better suited to circulate among their own people, and the cyborgs that they rejected would starve without a way to earn from entertaining their masters. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Justin read Dido's face. He felt partly responsible for Castor's use of Dido's likeness 20 years ago. He felt responsible, even though he knew better. Justin knew that Castor would have used Dido, even if he hadn't dragged his girlfriend into his rebellious mess. Being human, she appealed to the audience Castor wanted to enchant. You really think humans would turn on their own kind? Justin challenged. Castor chuckled. The private district wouldn't exist if humans valued their own as you imply, Castor replied. But you used her humanity to seduce them into trusting us for 20 years, Justin argued. Castor stood from his chair, a prop resembling a throne. They hate themselves in equal measure. As I said before, there would not be a district of cyborg rejects performing perfection without their self-hatred. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido tightened her fists, then disassociated. Fine. What now? She said, giving in as she had for 20 years. Castor hovered in Dido's personal space and plotted out loud. Dido protected what peace she still had as Castor's words rang around her invisible bubble. Somewhere there's a record of Paul's investigation. Dido, you'll need to unlock your mother's library documents and find your father's trade files, Castor said. Justin interrupted. No, you can't make her break into something as sacred as our records. Our records. We could corrode Myth's neural network. We could all wake up tomorrow believing we can fly and jump. Castor stopped Justin short of panicking. We came out on top before. Look at us now. Castor turned to leave Justin and Dido alone. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Justin and Dido were given a task that both of them found unethical. They were faced with a similar task 20 years ago, when Castor persuaded Justin to use his artistic talent to draw Ringmaster Columbus, submit the image to Myth's digital memory, then delete the image altogether. Since Columbus was cyborg, his likeness in the form of a digital image was categorized within Myth's ontology as the real being. And when Columbus's image was deleted from the system, The real man's soul was trashed as well. For a while, Castor told the teens to pretend as though Ringmaster Columbus was still alive. Castor would secretly call the shots now, as everyone believed Ringmaster Columbus was in control. Castor probably would have kept his secret for longer if it wasn't for Dido's father's invention, and that conspicuous detective Paul. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.
Dido and Paul searched her father's lab records. You know what? I feel sorry for him. He wanted what Castor has, which is just so stupid. But I understand, Dido said. I get it. The audience doesn't understand what we go through. We're celebrities to them. They don't have a concept of the kind of limitations that constrain us. Dido stumbles upon an utterance error that she'd never seen before, simply named complexity. She explained the error seeing lines of code leading to a phantom entity. This complexity error, it's leading to something hidden, Dido said. Justin wondered how Dido was able to debug without alerting digits. Dido's thoughts were unprotected from the AI since she was human with private district citizenship. Did Castor deactivate the clown? Justin asked. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido nodded. Yes. Castor had to temporarily grant me protection from the system, Dido answered. He could do that the whole time? Justin asked. Of course, I knew he could. But what can I do? She said, focusing on debugging the error. Hidden complexity. Awareness is all there is, she said under her breath. Hidden complexity, subjective truth, alternative facts, alternate universe. Dido continued to read lines of code. Hey, do you remember what we learned in history about how a long time ago, myth replaced science? Dido asked Justin. Or, no, it was that science used to be the study of why reality is what it is, and myth was something people believed in, so the terms were switched. Dido corrected herself before Justin could answer. Yeah, I remember. Populations started believing in science instead of using it as a tool to disprove belief, and science became mythology and vice versa, he said. Why, you ask? To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.
Dido scanned lines of code. I'm seeing a switch again. I think the error has something to do with our concepts of mythology and science. It has something to do with our people's objective truth. It's like the system isn't reading an objective truth, and therefore the system's unstable. I don't know if we're going to be able to find Detective Paul's files. It's as if he never existed. Just as Dido completed her thought, Castor entered. Progress, Castor asked. Unfortunately, not with finding the detective's records, Dido answered. Or with what my father did to Paul to allow him to poach your power of surveillance. But I found an error in the system that, if fixed, would repair more than our nuclear concerns. Fixing it might go as far as to repair the divide between our two districts. We could end private poverty for good. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.
Dido presented her understanding of the error to Castor. My father once explained to me how the system runs off of data, and my mother once explained to me how she organized data to form information. That information is then categorized into a web of knowledge, a network. This error seems to be occurring at the information level.
I'll have to examine incoming data and just observe how the clown sorts it to truly understand the bug. Castor agreed to give Dido 2 weeks of time to observe the error of hidden complexity. He agreed to extend her thought surveillance protection during this time to avoid burning out a fuse from an infinity loop of observation and surveillance. Justin was assigned to report on Dido's progress in place of the surveillance from which she was usually unprotected, being that she was human and a private citizen. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.
Dido retreated to her room for the night. She felt she should have been anxious given the circumstances. If Castor was correct, Detective Paul could return to explore Castor's plot to exploit public trust, and she would be the villain that the audiences would feel entitled to attack. She thought that she should have been nervous, but instead of dread, she felt relief. If only for 2 weeks, she could think freely without surveillance, and she was just grateful for that alone. She could finally sit back and think through her emotions fully. She finally followed her thoughts, and her journey led her straight to her deepest desire. She wanted the freedom to think freely, and she would either need to escape and disappear like Detective Paul, or become cyborg to earn protection. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.
As Dido fell asleep to the pleasant freedoms of surveillance-free thought, Paul began another sleepless night since accepting the full capacity of his fluid finish. His reward was accessing Castor's feed. Paul knew that Dido, Justin, and Castor were searching for his records. He also knew that Goose, Myth's librarian, had received the very missing piece to Dido's puzzle. Dido was on the right track in solving the hidden complexity error, and her mother, Goose, was secretly working on categorizing the mysterious object within Myth's ontology. However, Paul was only seeking Mona's location. But of course, whenever Paul opens his fluid floodgates, he can never control the information that funnels through. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Goose observed the amorphous object given to her by a mysterious young fan. Over time, she observed the object change from a solid to a liquid to a gas and back again. And again. She thought that she might classify the object together with H2O, but there didn't seem to be an obvious reason for its change in state. It would change even when temperatures did not. Goose wanted to rule out the possibility that the object could be Myth's missing nucleus. But the object's capricious nature matched all descriptions and accounts. Goose needed to try and disprove her theory in every way she could before classifying it as such. Though her husband was retired, she needed a second observer to disprove her developing theory of reality. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Einstein rarely left his elaborate apartment within the East Hall. He and his wife shared the master bedroom and a spacious unit with a kitchen, laboratory, music room, and private library. Their private library was connected to Myth's main library in North Hall by a private tunnel with a monorail system. It could transport Goose from Myth's library to her private library within her apartment in minutes. A similar system connected Einstein's private laboratory and Myth's main laboratory in North Hall. Goose took her tram back to her apartment to meet her husband and reveal to him her subject of study. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. She told her husband of a new document delivered to her by a fan named after the most dangerous artifact known to their people. A young woman named Image delivered the object. Goose told her husband that she believed it was an orphan heirloom, and she suspected it to be Myth's missing nucleus. Einstein listened to Goose's thesis and agreed to test the item to try and disprove the theory. If he could not disprove that the object was Myth's missing nucleus, then Goose would categorize it as such within Myth's anthology, and a new belief would be cemented within their living structure. Her husband took the task seriously. The return of an orphan heirloom such as this one would structure all that they believed. Returning Myth's nucleus could bring all cells of the public and private body into alignment, but the wrong piece could weaken ties. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Einstein started with a question. He cleared his mind, closed his eyes, and gave his consent for the clown to access his silent utterances. Focusing on the void of sight and sound, Einstein went within to find just the right question. What is Myth's origin? Einstein thought silently, then opened his eyes to observe the amorphous object. The clown supported Einstein with background research, and after a few hours, Einstein formed his hypothesis. Myth's origin is the stellar remnant of old science, Einstein stated, as the clown recorded his words on a tablet. This object, when compared to old science, will contain the same properties. Einstein needed to test the object to compare its properties to that of science before Myth's massive paradigm shift, when mythology and science switched meanings. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Old science did not prove anything. The function of old science and testing through use of the scientific method was meant to disprove. For example, if the common belief is that all swans are white, the old scientific method could disprove the belief by finding a black swan. Debunking was the name of the game and the purpose of science. However, people began to misunderstand science, and instead of using its method to debunk beliefs, they began to trust facts without testing them, and new science was born. New science was based on belief. Those who did not resonate with new scientific beliefs were not trusted, and they lost their social status. Those who did not resonate with new scientific beliefs questioned and debunked. And though trusted humans rejected old science society, they patronized old scientists for personal human entertainment. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Einstein tested the object and found the same properties as the structure of old science, but he also found a blemish that broke its cell wall. He called the blemish X for lack of a better name. He didn't know what it was, or if it even mattered to measure it. Then he realized that when he measured X, the structure of the object would stabilize. He wasn't sure if this spooky behavior was real or a coincidence. He observed day after day that when he looked directly at the blemish on the cell wall, the object would stay in a consistent state of matter. And, when he chose to ignore the blemish, the object would periodically change in state and form. He named this observed phenomenon kayfabe. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. He named the phenomenon kayfabe after an old-world entertainment term relating to an audience's suspension of disbelief. In the old world, when an audience chose to accept that their reality was fake, they were unbothered by contradictions, glitches, and inconsistencies. They suspended their disbelief for the entertainment of watching conflict collide in battle. They didn't care about logic or truth as long as they were invited to watch. Likewise, as long as Einstein kept his sight on the cell wall's blemish, the matter would present itself as he wanted. When he wanted a liquid, the matter would flow as fluid. When he wanted a solid, the matter would harden its mass. When he wanted a gas, the matter would vaporize. As long as he kept his eye on the object's flaw, the object would obey his desire. And he found himself accepting the inconsistent lie for the illusion of power over it. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. The next morning, Dido woke up from a peaceful sleep. She couldn't remember the last time Castor allowed her to think freely without thought surveillance technology. On the other hand, Detective Paul couldn't rest. Hidden away in his distant cave, he allowed his fluid finish to supply information at full capacity. This morning, he knew too much. Dido knew that today she had to visit her mother and father to locate Paul's records. If Dido didn't find out what her parents did to allow Paul to remove his records, Paul might have an advantage. She knew that Paul might inform the audience of Castor, Justin, and Dido's secret. And since Dido was the face of their con, the audience would come for her first. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido had nothing to hide from her parents. Her father understood how manipulative the ringmaster's role was. Like Columbus before him, Castor continued a legacy of leadership powered by fear. Since she already searched her mother's database and could not find a trace of Detective Paul's records in her mother's ontology, Dido decided to start by questioning her father. She knew her father had something to do with Paul's transformation. Paul was a human before investigating myth. Yet, when he left the circus, he was suddenly cyborg. She knew her father was the only one who could have implanted a cyborg finish on a public citizen. She met her father at noon, when she knew he'd be using Myth's university lab. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido scanned her eyes at Einstein's door to alert her father of her presence. Einstein received a notification in his line of sight. This visual notification was a new feature that was just recently added to cyborg finishes. User testing suggested that cyborgs preferred visual feedback to help them to discern between their own thoughts and the information sent to them through their connection to Myth's smart city system. Einstein thought his command to unlock the laboratory doors, and the doors opened to allow Dido access. "I'm working on a new feature for humans, such as yourself," Einstein said to Dido. "Something like what cyborgs have now. You'll be able to tell what thoughts are your own," he said. "That's great, Dad. But won't I need a cyborg finish for that to happen?" Dido asked. Einstein turned around to see his daughter pensive, a serious concern brewing behind her eyes. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Silence imagined braiding her daughter's hair, as she had imagined herself as a mother when she was young, and braiding the blades of grass on field trips to the public district. The public district, lush with vegetation, was far from the sights and sounds of her origins. Now, mother to a daughter named Image, Silence prayed that she made the right choice by sending the young woman into battle with a mission. Her mission was to deliver Mona's message in the form of an heirloom. The message was specific for the followers of myth. Her message was in the form of an orphan heirloom belonging to them, but missing. It is their forgotten piece. Good, bad, or neither. The nucleus made them who they are, and destiny will call them back to it when the core dims. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. As Dido stood in her father's lab questioning him about his role in empowering Detective Paul, her mind wandered, and she didn't cage it. With limited time granted to her by Castor, she had agency to wander without the ringmaster recording her thoughts. So she took a path leading to more questions. She remembered Mona's dreamscape and how Castor couldn't access it. Then she asked her father as she mentally made the connection. "What did Mona have to do with all of this?" she asked. Her father almost choked at the mention of Mona, the expat teacher from the public district. "She was a unique conductor," Einstein said. "Paul and Castor, they were a pair I never imagined possible. What happened to one would happen to the other. Poor Mona was caught in the middle of it," he said. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido thought for a moment about her so-called fans, how they worshipped the image of her, and how Castor used her fame to collect their trust. She thought about what it would mean to Castor if she lost her fans. He could possibly find another shield or fall person to fill Dido's role. Then Dido realized that getting cancelled could actually be the very gift she's wanted for years. She could disappear. Hopefully Castor wouldn't have a need for her. She could live without constant criticism from her audience. She could take on a new identity. Maybe exposure needed to happen. She suddenly thought of Linda the lion tamer and how trapped the woman felt before she went missing. Linda. The hallways haunted Dido with Linda's memories for years until the thought of the missing lion tamer fizzled out with the success of Dido's act. But maybe it was Dido's turn to vanish. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. Dido escaped before. At least she felt she had escaped at the time. In a short-lived period of freedom, she escaped to the public district as a celebrity. This was right after Castor legalized image, and Dido was the first person public citizens had seen pictured. As a celebrity, Dido collected trust that never would have transferred before legal image. Her celebrity gave her the power to escape, but her freedom was short-lived, of course. Castor took control of all trust she collected, claiming it as his own since he made her celebrity possible. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson. At first, Castor convinced Dido that changing the private district into an oligarchy was a good thing. The public had dehumanized private citizens and segregated them into a ghetto, cursing them to beg for trust by entertaining the audience, the public. The public deserved what was coming to them, Dido thought, based on Castor's influence. So Dido joyfully followed Castor's plan and stepped into the spotlight as the first photographed person, canceling the sin and their culture's revered abstinence from it. The public and private were free thanks to the legalization of image. But, just as Dido had discovered, the world's freedom was short-lived. Without their sin to guide them, Castor stepped in to puppeteer. A private citizen had control of the public, and Dido approved, at first. To be continued. A story by Kendra Dobson.